You stand before a ruined desert shrine. The air is still, but not quiet. Sand whispers against weathered stone, sliding into crevices that have held secrets for 3,000 years. The sun beats down mercilessly, but the shadows here feel colder than they should. At your feet lies a broken tablet, half buried, half destroyed. And carved into its surface, worn but unmistakable, is a single name: Moloch. You've heard this name before, haven't you? In warnings, in whispers, in the margins of forbidden texts, but never in a story, never spoken with reverence, only with dread. The priests who carved this tablet wanted it erased, so did the conquerors who came after them, and the scholars who tried to study it centuries later. They too wished it had stayed buried. So here's the question that brought you to this forsaken place. Was Moloch a real god, a misunderstood deity twisted by propaganda? Or was he something more dangerous, a weapon wielded by those who wanted to destroy their enemies by destroying their reputations first? Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of a god who was erased not once, but 3 times, by 3 different civilizations, for 3 different reasons. And by the end, you'll understand why some names are more dangerous remembered than forgotten. But before we descend into this darkness together, if you're fascinated by the hidden corners of ancient history, the gods they tried to erase, the rituals they tried to hide, the truths buried beneath layers of propaganda, then subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're going places most historians won't take you. To understand Moloch, we have to go back to the Bronze Age Levant, modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, around 1400 BCE. This is a landscape of city-states, each with their own patron deities. And in the archaeological record, we find something unusual: inscriptions, fragments, references to something called MLK. Now here's where it gets complicated, because in the ancient Punic language, the language of the Phoenicians and later the Carthaginians, MLK means sacrifice, specifically a type of votive offering, a gift to the gods. But in Northwest Semitic languages, MLK means king. 2 meanings, 1 word, and somewhere in the convergence of these definitions, later cultures would create one of the most terrifying figures in ancient mythology. The earliest physical evidence we have comes from Canaanite temple sites, stone altars blackened by fire, clay votive figurines, their features melted, and deep pits filled with ash and bone fragments, surrounded by inscriptions calling for divine favor. These weren't hidden practices. They were public rituals, conducted in broad daylight, witnessed by entire communities. The altars glowed red-hot, the flames rose high, and the smoke could be seen for miles. But what exactly were they offering to these fires? That question would haunt scholars for millennia, and the answer would be weaponized by empires. Because by the time Greek and Roman writers got their hands on these stories, MLK the sacrifice and MLK the king had merged into something else entirely. Moloch, the king who demands sacrifice, the god with an insatiable hunger. And the image they painted would become so powerful, so visceral, that it would outlive the civilizations that created it. The descriptions come from multiple ancient sources: Greek historians, Roman chroniclers, biblical texts, and they all tell variations of the same horrifying story. A bronze statue, massive, bull-headed, or sometimes with the features of a crowned king, its arms extended forward, tilted slightly downward, and its interior hollow, designed to contain a furnace. The ritual, as described, went like this. The statue would be heated until its bronze skin glowed. The arms would become unbearably hot, and then, according to the texts, offerings would be placed upon those burning arms and slide down into the flames within. The drums would beat, loud enough to drown out any sounds. The fire would roar, the smoke would rise black and thick into the sky, and Moloch would consume what was given to him. Now, before we go further, we need to address the question you're already asking. Is this real? Did this actually happen? And the answer is complicated. The descriptions we have come primarily from hostile sources, Greek and Roman writers who were describing their enemies, biblical texts that were warning against foreign practices. These are not neutral accounts. They are propaganda, moral lessons, political ammunition. The most frequently cited practitioners? The Carthaginians, descendants of Phoenician colonists who built an empire across North Africa. And when Rome finally destroyed Carthage in 146 BCE, Roman writers had every reason to paint their defeated enemy as barbaric, cruel, and deserving of annihilation. Look what they did. Look how monstrous they were. We were right to destroy them. But here's where archaeology complicates the story. In Carthage and other Punic sites across North Africa, archaeologists have discovered what are called Topheth cemeteries, sacred burial grounds filled with thousands of urns containing cremated remains. And yes, many of these remains are of infants and very young children. The question is, why? Some scholars point to the classical texts and say, see, the ritual descriptions were true. Others argue that infant mortality rates in the ancient world were catastrophic, perhaps as high as 50% in the first year of life. These could be sacred burial grounds for children who died of natural causes, cremated and interred with religious ceremony to honor their brief lives.
Still others suggest a middle ground, that offerings did occur but may have been symbolic or reserved for extreme circumstances, times of war, famine, or plague. The truth is, we don't know for certain. The evidence is fragmentary, the texts are biased, and the archaeology is open to interpretation. But here's what we do know. Whether the rituals happened exactly as described or not is almost irrelevant, because the image of Moloch, the hungry god, the child devourer, the ultimate taboo, became so powerful that it transcended reality. The myth became a tool, and that tool would be used again and again and again. Because Moloch wasn't just erased, he was weaponized. And to understand how, we need to look at who wanted him gone and why. The first erasure was political. In the early Israelite texts, the writings that would eventually become part of the Hebrew Bible, Moloch appears not as a fully formed deity with myths and stories, but as a forbidden practice, a line that must not be crossed. Leviticus 18:21, "You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Moloch." Leviticus 22, "Any Israelite or any foreigner residing in Israel who gives any of his children to Moloch is to be put to death." Notice what's missing here. There's no origin story, no mythology, no explanation of who Moloch is or where he came from. He simply exists as a boundary marker, a symbol of what the Israelites must not become. This is deliberate. The writers weren't interested in preserving Moloch's story. They were interested in using him as a cautionary tale, a representation of the foreign, the forbidden, the other. In the ancient Near East, religious identity and political identity were inseparable. To worship your God was to declare your loyalty to your city, your king, your people, and to worship another god, especially through practices your community deemed abhorrent, was an act of cultural betrayal. By the time these texts were being compiled, likely during and after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE, Israelite identity was fragile. The people had been conquered, displaced, scattered. And in that moment of existential crisis, defining what you are not becomes as important as defining what you are. We are not the Canaanites who practiced these rituals. We are not the Phoenicians with their fire altars. We are not the people who give their children to Moloch. And so Moloch becomes a weapon of identity formation, not a god to be remembered, but a practice to be forgotten, a name to be spoken only as a warning. This is the first erasure, the political erasure, the transformation of a possible deity into a symbol of everything you must reject to remain yourself. But the erasure was just beginning. The second erasure was theological. As monotheism spread, first through Judaism, then Christianity, then Islam, the divine landscape of the ancient world underwent a radical transformation. Where once there were many gods, each with their own domains and devotees, now there could be only one. But what happens to all the other gods?
They don't simply disappear. They are demoted, redefined, transformed. In early Jewish and Christian demonology, the old gods of neighboring peoples are reconceived as demons, fallen angels, servants of evil masquerading as divine beings to lead humanity astray. Baal, the storm god, becomes Beelzebub, lord of the flies. Astarte, the goddess of love and war, becomes Ashtoreth, a demon of lust. And Moloch, already stained with the accusation of child sacrifice, becomes something even darker. A demon of corruption, a tempter who demands the ultimate price. By the time we reach the medieval period, Moloch has a secure place in the infernal hierarchy. He appears in grimoires, books of demonology, as a prince of hell. His sin? Causing parents to murder their own children. His punishment? Eternal service in the flames he once demanded. The transformation is complete. What may have begun as a legitimate deity, or perhaps merely a word for sacrifice, has become an embodiment of the absolute worst humanity can do. But here's the crucial point. In this transformation, the original Moloch, whatever he actually was, is completely lost. The texts no longer ask who he was. They no longer preserve his myths, his attributes, his proper worship. All of that is gone, deliberately obscured. It was no longer important who Moloch was, only what he represented. This is the second erasure, the theological erasure, the transformation from deity to demon, from complex religious figure to simple symbol of evil. And yet there was still one more erasure to come, one more group who needed Moloch to be a monster. 146 BCE, the Third Punic War ends with fire. Carthage, the great Phoenician city that had challenged Rome for control of the Mediterranean, is destroyed. Not just defeated, annihilated. The city is burned for 17 days. The survivors are sold into slavery. The land is plowed with salt. And in the aftermath, Roman writers set to work on their own form of conquest, historical conquest. Historians like Diodorus Siculus wrote detailed accounts of Carthaginian practices. They described the bronze statue of Moloch in lurid detail. They told stories of noble families offering their own children during times of crisis. They painted a picture of a civilization so corrupt, so barbaric, that its destruction wasn't just justified. It was necessary. This is propaganda at its finest. Because here's the thing about Carthage. By the time these accounts were being written, Carthage no longer existed. There were no Carthaginians left to contest these stories, no defenders to say, that's not how it was. The victors write history, and Rome had won completely. Moloch became a symbol in Roman rhetoric, a shorthand for everything Rome was not. Where Rome was civilized, Carthage was barbaric. Where Rome valued law and order, Carthage practiced chaos and cruelty. Where Rome protected children, Carthage sacrificed them. Didn't matter whether these accounts were accurate. What mattered was that they served a purpose. They transformed a military victory into a moral victory. Rome didn't just defeat Carthage. Rome saved the world from Carthage. And Moloch, whether he ever truly existed as the Romans described or not, became the centerpiece of that narrative, the ultimate proof of Carthaginian depravity. This is the third erasure, the imperial erasure, the weaponization of a god's image to justify genocide. 3 civilizations, 3 erasures, 3 reasons to make sure no one remembered the real Moloch, if there ever was one. But erasure is never complete, because the name survived, and with it something deeper.
Let's step back from history for a moment and ask a different question. What did Moloch actually represent? Not who he was, but what he meant to the people who feared him. At its core, Moloch embodies one of humanity's deepest terrors, the fear of losing one's children. In the ancient world, children were not just beloved family members, they were survival. They were the continuation of your lineage, your legacy, your name. They were your labor force, your old age security, your immortality. To lose a child was to lose your future. And Moloch, as he was imagined, demanded exactly that. He asked for the one thing no one should ever have to give, the one sacrifice that could never be justified. But there's more. Moloch also represented the fear of divine wrath, the terror that your God might demand something you cannot bear to give, and that refusing might bring even worse consequences. It's the ultimate theological trap. Obey and lose everything. Refuse and lose even more. Beyond that, Moloch symbolized the fear of the foreign, the fear of them. In every culture that spoke his name with dread, Moloch was something other people did, other cultures. Those people over there, the ones who don't share our values, who don't understand civilization, who practice unspeakable things. Moloch became a container for xenophobia, a way to say, we are good because we are not them. We are righteous because we do not do what they do. And finally, perhaps most insidiously, Moloch represented the fear of what we ourselves might be capable of. Because the accusations of child sacrifice weren't always aimed outward, sometimes they were internal. Biblical prophets accused their own people of falling into Moloch worship. Roman satirists accused Roman officials of sacrificing their citizens' children to ambition and greed. Moloch holds up a mirror, and what he reflects is the darkest possibility, that under the right circumstances, any civilization might sacrifice its young for power, for survival, for victory. This is why Moloch endures, not because the historical practices were real or false, but because the fears he embodies are eternal. We are still afraid of losing our children. We are still afraid of unthinkable demands. We are still afraid of becoming the monsters we condemn. And that fear needed a name. Moloch gave it one. Now let's return to the evidence, the physical traces, the archaeology that might finally tell us what actually happened. The key sites are the Tophet cemeteries, sacred precincts found in Carthage and other Punic settlements across North Africa, Sardinia, Sicily, and Malta. These are areas containing thousands upon thousands of urns, buried with stone markers called stelae. Inside the urns, cremated remains. And according to multiple studies, many of these remains are of infants, some newborns, some slightly older. The question that has divided scholars over a century is simple. Why are these children here? Let's look at the competing interpretations. Theory 1. The classical accounts are true. Some archaeologists and historians argue that the physical evidence confirms the textual descriptions. The sheer number of infant remains, the burn patterns on the bones, the ritual context of the burials, all of this suggests systematic sacrifice. They point to inscriptions found at Tophet sites that use the word MLK, that ambiguous term meaning either sacrifice or king. They argue that this is evidence of a sacrificial cult practiced over centuries.
Theory 2. These are simply burial grounds. Other scholars argue that infant mortality in the ancient world was staggeringly high. Disease, malnutrition, lack of medical knowledge, children died constantly. Perhaps as many as half of all children born never reached their 5th birthday. In this interpretation, Tophet cemeteries are sacred burial grounds for children who died of natural causes. Cremation was an expensive, elaborate process. These weren't casual disposals, but honored burials. The families were showing respect, giving their lost children a proper send-off in consecrated ground. The word MLK in the inscriptions, they argue, simply refers to a type of burial offering, not a living sacrifice. Theory 3. The middle ground. A third group of scholars suggests the truth may lie somewhere between. Yes, some offerings may have occurred, but not in the systematic, routine way described by hostile sources. Perhaps during extreme crises, sieges, famines, plagues. Perhaps as symbolic acts rather than literal killings. Perhaps substitution practices emerged, where animals were offered instead. The archaeology, they argue, shows complexity. Not all the remains are of infants, some are of older children, some may be of small animals. The burial practices varied over time and between locations. The scientific challenge. Modern forensic analysis has attempted to settle the debate, but even science has its limits. Cremated infant bones are notoriously difficult to analyze. Distinguishing between infant and small animal remains is challenging. Determining cause of death from cremated fragments is often impossible. One landmark study in 2014 analyzed remains from Carthage Tophets and concluded they were primarily prenatal or stillbirth burial. But other scholars immediately challenged the methodology, the sample size, the conclusions. So, where does that leave us? Here's the uncomfortable truth. We don't know for certain. The evidence is fragmentary, ambiguous, and open to interpretation. The texts are biased. The archaeology is complex. But here's what we can say with confidence. History did not erase Moloch alone. Competing civilizations did. Whether the practices happened exactly as described or not, the name Moloch was useful. Too useful to let die completely, too dangerous to let live openly. And so he survived in the margins, in the shadows, waiting for the next civilization that needed a monster to fear.
The ancient world ended. The empires fell. Carthage crumbled to dust. The temples were forgotten. But Moloch survived. In medieval Europe, scholars poring over ancient texts encountered the name again. And in an age obsessed with cataloging demons and codifying evil, Moloch found new life. He appears in Johann Weyer's Pseudomonarchia Daemonum in 1577, a grimoire listing 69 demons. Moloch is described as a great prince of hell, appearing as a king crowned with flames. In the Dictionnaire Infernal of 1818, he's illustrated as a grotesque figure on a throne, surrounded by flames and offerings. The medieval mind, unable to conceive of Moloch as anything but evil, gave him an entire demonic identity. Court position in hell, specific powers, rituals to summon or banish him. Artists of the Renaissance and Baroque periods painted him. Moloch appears in grand religious artworks as a cautionary figure, a reminder of what happens when faith is corrupted, when power demands too much. English poets discovered him. John Milton, in Paradise Lost, 1677, gives Moloch a speaking role among the fallen angels. First Moloch, horrid king besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears. For Milton, Moloch represents the advocate for violence, the voice that argues for war at any cost. And then, something fascinating happens. As we move into the modern age, Moloch becomes metaphorical. In the 19th and 20th centuries, social critics begin using Moloch as a symbol for systems that consume individuals for their own perpetuation. The industrial machine becomes Moloch, devouring workers. War becomes Moloch, feeding on young soldiers. Capitalism becomes Moloch, sacrificing human dignity for profit. The poet Allen Ginsberg, in his 1956 masterpiece Howl, uses Moloch as a litany. Moloch whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch whose blood is running money.
For Ginsburg, Moloch is any system that treats humans as fuel, that demands we sacrifice our children, literally or figuratively, to keep the machine running. And in our current age, Moloch has found a home in conspiracy theories. Online communities convinced that secret elite groups practice ancient rituals. QAnon narratives that borrow heavily from blood libel myths and satanic panic fears. The historical Moloch, if he ever existed, is completely gone now. What remains is pure symbol, pure fear. Each age reinvents Moloch in its own image, makes him the embodiment of whatever that age fears most, whatever threatens to consume what we hold dear. He is a god made of fears that never die, and that's why he could never truly be erased.
You stand again in the ruined shrine. The sun has moved across the sky, but the shadows here remain cold. The broken tablet at your feet still bears that name, carved deep into ancient stone. Moloch. The fire has long gone cold. The priests who served here, if they ever existed, are 3,000 years gone. The civilizations that tried to erase this name have themselves been erased. And yet you know the name. You came here seeking it. And now, in the silence, you finally understand. Moloch was not erased because he was monstrous. He was erased because he was useful. A god who may have never been a god, perhaps just a word, a type of offering, a ritual practice misunderstood by outsiders. A symbol weaponized by empires. Israelites defining themselves in opposition, Romans justifying genocide, Christians marking the boundaries of acceptable faith. A name that survived precisely because it was forbidden, because every age needed something to point to and say, that is what we are not. That is the line we will not cross. A warning that outlived the world that created it, and found new life in every generation that followed. Was there ever a bronze statue? Did flames consume offerings on burning arms? Did drums beat to drown out cries? Maybe. Maybe not. The evidence is scattered, contradictory, filtered through layers of bias and time. But the truth is darker than any myth could be. The real Moloch, whoever or whatever he was, stopped mattering the moment he became a tool, an accusation, a weapon. Every civilization needs its monsters, needs its forbidden names, needs its cautionary tales that say, this far and no further. And Moloch has served that purpose for 3,000 years. He was erased from history so he could be written into nightmare. He was stripped of his mythology so he could become pure symbol. He was forbidden so he could never be forgotten. You take one last look at the ruined shrine, the name carved in stone, and you understand something profound. Some gods die when forgotten. Others grow stronger in the shadows. If this journey into the darkest corners of ancient history has left you thinking, questioning, hungry for more, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who appreciates the hidden truths beneath the myths we think we know.